Hi, my name is Susan O'Connor. The second monogramming technique I would like to show you is raised stem stitch. This is another monogramming technique that you may like to try. It's quite different from the padded satin stitch. The stitch technique is known as raised stem stitch or raised stem band, and it's a technique where you work a series of bars across the shape that you're going to fill. And you can see here, I've actually worked these onto this letter. And then you work raised stem stitch over the top of these. Now, raised stem stitch is simply a stem stitch that instead of going through the fabric, it just goes beneath these bars. So these are the foundation for the stitch. And in a way, it's almost the opposite of satin stitch padding, because in satin stitch padding, the final stitching is the stitching that is worked across the shape, and the padding is worked parallel to the edges. In this technique, it's the foundation stitches that are worked across the shape, and then the filling is worked parallel to the edges. So once I have all of my bars in, and you can see they're worked at a right angle to the edge of the S, so the direction of these stitches changes all the time. Don't make them too close together. Don't make them too far apart. You have to find that happy medium where they are just the right distance apart. And these are probably around 1/8 of an inch. To begin the filling, you bring the needle up at the end of the shape. Now, because this is a detached technique, you need to use a tapestry needle. Don't use a needle with a point because you'll catch the thread and the fabric. Raised stem stitch is simply worked by sliding the needle beneath each one of the bars and then pulling the thread down towards yourself. Don't pull it at an angle. If you pull it at an angle, you will distort the foundation bar. Make sure it's firm. Then you go under the next bar. Pull it through. And you're going to keep working like this right around to the end of the shape. When you find instruction for this technique, you may find some information that tells you that you need to begin all of the rows at the same end. You don't. You can go to the end and then just come back the other way, because if you think about a stem stitch looks the same way regardless of which direction you turn it. You can see here that a stem stitch sits with, and it moves from the top left to the lower right, to the bottom right. If I turn that around this way, it's still exactly the same. Top left to bottom right. The stitch always angles like that. So there's no reason why you can't go around and then just turn around and come back the other way. It's not going to make any difference to it. So you're just going to keep on going like that round to the very end. In this sample, I've done 4 rows. And you can see that the very narrow parts of the letter are actually almost complete. This part here is filled, this part here is filled. You want to make sure that you've always got room left for a final row, because what I need to do now is to start filling these thicker areas. So these will have part rows where I work along and back and along and back until the shape is filled. But my very last row of stitching will work along the entire length of the whole letter. And you can see here, this is the technique completed. It's not quite as smooth and satiny as the satin stitch. In fact, it has a slightly different surface to it. But you can see it still gives you a very effective raised padded letter or monogram. Traditionally, a monogram was actually a collection of letters. It wasn't a single letter. It was a collection that were put together. Like this would be classified as a true monogram. but the term has now come to mean any representation of a single letter or a collection of letters. This is a really beautiful example of very, very fine monogramming. This handkerchief probably dates from the late 19th century, and the stitching on this is just absolutely exquisite, but you can see the sort of scale of work that was done during those times. So that's two different techniques that you may like to try. I hope you do so, and I hope you enjoy working them.